Okay, so the purpose of reading this literary criticism article is going to be to understand how to analyze literary criticism so that when you are analyzing it with your groups, for your projects, you know exactly how to read a lit crit article, okay? There might be some lag time, so that's going to be fun. A lot of lag time. Okay. Oh, there it goes. All right. Macbeth is a Tragic Hero by Wayne C. Booth. I'm going to show you my annotations. We'll try to decipher what he is trying to support or what he's looking at critically within the literature, hence why it's called literary criticism. All right, here we go. Maybe. Okay. Put even in its simplest terms, the problem Shakespeare gave himself in Macbeth was a tremendous one. Take a good man, a noble man, a man admired by all who know him, and destroy him, not only physically and emotionally, but as the Greeks destroyed their heroes, but also morally and intellectually. As if this were not difficult enough as a dramatic hurdle, while transforming him into one of the most despicable mortals conceivable, maintain him as a tragic hero. What is a tragic hero?
A hero that's gone bad.
Yes, a hero that has a downfall, okay? So that is to keep him so sympathetic that when he comes to his death, the audience will pity rather than detest him, and will be relieved to see him out of his misery rather than pleased to see him destroyed. Was anyone, just curious, relieved to see Macbeth finally put out of his misery in the end? Okay, good, good. Put in... I saw, how many people were not relieved? How many people were like, oh my gosh, it's about time. Okay. Okay. Well.
She meant the opposite.
Okay. Gotcha. So put in Shakespeare's own terms. Take a noble man full of the conscience and the milk of human kindness, and make him a dead butcher, yet keep him an object of pity rather than hatred. Shh. If we thus artificially reconstruct the problem as it might have existed before the play was written, we see that in choosing these terminal points and these terminal intentions, Shakespeare makes almost impossible demands on his dramatic skill, although at the same time he ensures that if he succeeds at all, he will succeed magnificently. If the trick can be turned, it will inevitably be a great one. Go ahead and write down at the top of your page basically the thesis of what Booth is going to set out to prove. Booth will prove Macbeth as a tragic hero through, that says Shakespeare's successful use of the sympathetic degenerative plot. Now, we don't know what the sympathetic degenerative plot is, but it will state it in the next paragraph, and we will gather context clues to kind of put it together. Again, Booth is arguing that Macbeth is a tragic hero through Shakespeare's successful use of the sympathetic degenerative plot. Okay. One need only consider the many relative failures in attempts at similar plots and effects to realize the difficulties involved. When dramatists or novelists attempt the sympathetic degenerative plot, almost always one or another of the following failures or transformations occur. So he's going to list possible problems with the sympathetic degenerative plot. Okay. The first one being the feeling of abhorrence for the protagonist becomes so strong that all sympathy is lost, and the play or novel becomes punitive, that is, the reader or spectator's chief pleasure depends on his satisfaction in revenge or punishment. Okay, so he's noting the problems that he sees with the sympathetic degenerative plot when it's done incorrectly. The first one is listed there. We highlighted it. The second The protagonist is never really made very wicked. After all, he only seems wicked by conventional and by implication unsound standards, and is really a highly admirable reform candidate. The third, the protagonist reforms in the end, and he avoids proper punishment. And the fourth problem is the book or the play itself becomes a wicked work that is either deliberately or unconsciously the artist makes us side with his degenerated hero against morality. If it is deliberate that we have propaganda works of one kind or another, often resembling the second type above, if it is unconscious, we get works whose immorality, as in pornographic or sadistic treatments of the good girl turned horror, thief, or murderess, makes them unenjoyable as literature, unless the reader or spectator temporarily or permanently relaxes his own standards of moral judgment. Any of these failures or transformations can be found in conjunction with the most frequent failure of all. The degeneration remains finally unexplained, unmotivated. The forces employed to destroy the nobleman are found pitifully inadequate to make his fall seem credible. Even in works which are somewhat successful, there is almost some shrinking from a fully responsible engagement with the inherent difficulties. He's going to give us then an example of a failure. I'm just going to abbreviate it SDP, the sympathetic degenerative plot, in the next few lines. So, for example, in Tender is the Night, which is in many ways strikingly familiar to Macbeth, Fitzgerald waters down the effect in several ways. Dick Diver, Fitzgerald's nobleman, is destroyed, but he is destroyed only to helplessness, to unpopularity and drunkenness and poverty. He becomes a failure. The signs of his destruction are never grotesque acts of cruelty or wickedness of the kind committed by Macbeth, or of a kind which for the modern reader would be analogous in their unsympathetic quality. Rather, he speaks more sharply to people than he used to. He is no longer charming. This is indeed pitiful enough in its own way, but it is easy enough too, especially when the artist chooses, as Fitzgerald does, to report the final demoralization of the hero only vaguely and from a great distance. One never sees Dick Diver's final horrible moments as one sees Macbeth's. So that, at the end of his downward path, Diver has been more sinned against than sinning, and we have no obstacles to our pity. So this is why Fitzgerald fails. Do you see the difference between the type of character that he's illustrating here, one who is unpopular, who falls into this drunkenness and poverty, and yet never commits any sort of cruel acts as Macbeth did? Do you see a difference between the character he's describing in Macbeth? Okay. But on the other hand, since the fall has not been nearly so great, our pity that the fall should have occurred at all is attenuated, compared with the awfulness of the last hours of Macbeth. Other attenuations follow from this one. If the fall is not a very great one, the forces needed to produce it not to be great, although one might argue that even in Tender is the Night they should have been greater for credibility. Nicole, in a general atmosphere of gloom and decay, are made to do a job in which Macbeth requires some of the rich degenerative forces ever employed. If then comparison on these structural points is just, in spite of the strong differences between the works, it indicates that in point of difficulties faced, or one should say created, Shakespeare in Macbeth has it all over Fitzgerald. He has it all over anyone else I know who has attempted this form. So again, he's referring back to the fact that Shakespeare successfully pulls off this the sympathetic degenerative plot. Okay. Part 1 is going to be about how Shakespeare shows or creates this sympathy within the audience towards Macbeth. Okay, so he's going to go into ways that Shakespeare does this successfully. You're more than welcome to write in the margins. If you want to copy my annotations, great. If you have anything else to say, or if you think anything is confusing, please circle it. That way you can look into it a little bit later. A complete study of how Macbeth is made to succeed in spite of, or rather because of, the difficulties is perhaps beyond the capacities of any one reader. It is certainly impossible here, but the major devices employed, one never knows how consciously, by Shakespeare can be enumerated and discussed quite simply. The first step in convincing us that Macbeth's fall is a genuinely tragic occurrence is to convince us that there was in reality a fall. We must believe that Macbeth was once a man whom we could admire, a man with great potentialities. So that's step one, right? To establish Macbeth as an admirable by all. In order for there must be a fall. But first of all, he has to begin admirably. Bless you. One way to convince us would have been to show him, as Fitzgerald shows Dick Diver, in action as an admirable man. But although this is possible in a leisurely novel, it would, in a play, have wasted time needed for the important events which begin only with Macbeth's great temptation at the conclusion of the opening battle. So do you see how he offers the two examples, so the Fitzgerald example and then Macbeth? He also backs up his reasoning as to why it would have wasted time in a play, whereas Dick Diver's a character in Fitzgerald's novel. So have wasted time needed only for important events which begun only with Macbeth's great temptation at the conclusion of the opening battle. Thus, the superior choice in this case, although it would not necessarily always be so, is to begin your representation of the action with the first real temptation to the fall, and use testimony by the other characters to establish your protagonist's prior goodness. So that's why in Act 1, Scene 1, we open with the witches, and they choose their victim, Macbeth. We know there's going to be a fall right at the start of Macbeth, okay? But that doesn't match what how he's reputed by his surrounding characters, right? Let's read on. We are thus given from the beginning, sign after sign, that Macbeth's greatest nobility was reached at a point just prior to the opening of the play. When the play begins, he has already coveted the crown, and is shown by his excessively nervous reaction to the witch's prophecy. It is indeed likely that he has already considered foul means of obtaining it. But in spite of the wickedness already present in his mind, or to his mind, as a possibility, we have ample reason to think Macbeth as a man worthy of our admiration. He is brave and valiant, a worthy gentleman. Duncan calls him noble Macbeth. These epithets have an ironic quality only in retrospect. When they are first applied, one has no reason to doubt them. Indeed, they are true epithets, or they would have been true if applied, say, only a few days or months earlier. Of course, this testimony to his prior virtue, given by his friends in the midst of other business, would not carry the spectators for long with any sympathy for Macbeth. Wow, that is a lagging video. Oh my goodness. If it were not continued in several other forms. So we have the testimony of Lady Macbeth, the unimpeachable testimony of a bad person, casting the goodness of a good person, as she says, "Yet do I fear thy nature is too full of the milk of human kindness to catch the nearest way." So not only is Macbeth shown to be an admirable person from good people, but he's also shown to be an admirable character by the evil Lady Macbeth, right? No verbal evidence would be enough, however, if we did not see in Macbeth himself signs of its validity, since we have already seen many signs that he is not the good man that witnesses seem to believe. Thus, the best evidence we have of his essential goodness is his vacillation before the murder. What does it mean to vacillate between something? What does vacillation mean? To go back and forth, yes. And so Booth is arguing that Macbeth was still virtuous and remains a virtuous character because of his his conscience, right? His ability to weigh his options going back and forth at this point in the play. Just as Raskolnikov is tormented, and just as we ourselves, virtuous theater viewers, would be tormented, so Macbeth is tormented before the prospect of his own crime. Indeed, much as he wants the kingship, he decides in scene 3 against the murder. If chance will have me king, why chance may crown me without my start. And when he first meets Lady Macbeth, he is resolved not to murder Duncan. In fact, as powerful a rhetorician, yes, as she is, she has all she can do to get back at him on the course of murder. In addition, Macbeth's ensuing soliloquy not only weighs the possible bad practical consequences of his actions, but shows him perfectly aware, in a way an evil man would not be, of the moral values involved. He says here, he is here in double trust. First, as his kinsman and his subject, strong both against the deed, and then as his host, who should, against the murderer, shut the door, not bear the knife myself. In this speech we see, again, as we saw in the opening of the play, Shakespeare's wonderful economy. The very speech shows Macbeth the best advantage, or to best advantage is the one which shows the audience how very bad his contemplated act is, since Duncan is blameless. One need only think of the same speech if it were to be dealing with a king who deserves to be assassinated, or if it were given by another character commenting on Macbeth's actions, to see how right it is as it stands. So I want to pause here and kind of talk about how Booth is building this argument. What has he taken a look at so far? Yep. We've taken a look at Macbeth's conscience. I can't spell today. Cool. We can't see it. Okay. What else have we looked at? Yeah. So how other characters.
Testimony from like good and evil people.
Yeah. Testimonies, right? Good and evil. And so by him kind of exploring these things, do you think that his argument is effective? Is it sound? Or do you think that there were other things that maybe he should have been looking at?
The author?
Yeah, the author. Like, are these good things to kind of base an argument on? I would say so. Okay, so overall, the author's effectiveness proves true, right? So we can agree with his findings so far. Okay, that may change, but I just wanted to kind of take a moment to kind of like evaluate what it is we're reading, because that's what you're going to be doing in your group projects. You're going to be finding literary criticism and evaluating it for its effectiveness.
Over Macbeth.
Over Macbeth, yes. Or over aspects of Macbeth. So like this one's about how he was a tragic hero. You can find it over the supernatural, or Lady Macbeth, or Duncan himself. Like whatever it is you want to look at.
So are we making a slideshow over it?
I will go more into that on Tuesday. Mm-hmm. Okay. After this soliloquy, Macbeth announces again to Lady Macbeth that he will not go on. We will proceed no further in this business. But her eloquence is too much for him. Under her jibes at his unmanliness, he progresses from a kind of petulant, but still honorable, boasting. So he's like honorably defending himself. Honorably defensive. I dare do all that may become a man. Who dares do more is none. Though a state of a moral consideration of mere expectancy, if I should fail, to complete resolution, but still with a full understanding of the wickedness of his act. I am settled this terrible feat. There is never any doubt, first, that the bludgeoning into the deed by Lady Macbeth's superior rhetoric and the force of character, and by the pressure of the unfamiliar circumstances, including the witches, and second, that even in the final decision to go through with it, he is extremely troubled by a guilty conscience. False face must hide what the false heart doth know. In the entire dagger soliloquy, he is clearly suffering from the realization of the horror of the bloody business ahead. He sees fully and painfully the wickedness of the course he has chosen, but not until after the deed, when he is knocking, has commenced, do we realize how terrifyingly alive his conscience is. To know my deed, 'twere best to not know myself. Wake Duncan with thy knocking, I would thou couldst. This is the wish of a good man, who, though he has become a bad man, still thinks and feels as a good man would. To cite one last example of Shakespeare's pains in this matter, we have the testimony of Macbeth's character offered by Hecate. And which is worse, all you have done hath been but for a wayward son, spiteful and wrathful, who, as others do, loves for his own ends and not for you. This reaffirmation of Macbeth is not a true son of evil comes, interestingly enough, immediately after the murder of Banquo, at a time when the audience needs a reminder of Macbeth's fundamental nobility. The evil of his acts is thus built upon the knowledge that he is not a naturally evil man, but a man who has every potentiality for goodness. This potentiality and its frustrations are the chief ingredients of the tragedy of Macbeth. Macbeth is a man whose progressive external misfortunes seem to produce, and at the same time be produced by, his parallel progression from great goodness to great wickedness. Our emotional involvement, which perhaps should not be simplified under the term pity or pity and fear, is thus a combination of two kinds of regrets. So he's about to go into why we should sympathize with Macbeth. 1. We regret that any potentially good man should come to such a bad end. And 2, we regret even more the destruction of this particular man, a man who is not only morally sympathetic, but also intellectually and emotionally interesting. In eliciting both these kinds of regrets to such high degree, Shakespeare goes beyond his predecessors and establishes trends that are still working themselves out in literature. The first kind, never used at all by classical dramatists, who never employed a genuinely degenerative plot, has been attempted again and again by modern novelists. Their difficulty has usually been that they have relied too completely on general humane response in the reader and too little on a realized prior height or potentiality from which to fall. The protagonists are shown succumbing to their environment, or, as in so many sociological novels, already succumbed, and the reader is left to himself to infer that something worth bothering about this has gone to waste, that others might have been otherwise, and that there are any real reason to react emotionally to the final destruction. So he's going about the problems with the sympathetic degenerative plot in modern novels. The second kind, almost unknown to classical dramatists, whose characters are never really original or fresh in the modern sense, has been attempted in greater extremes since Shakespeare until one finds many works in which mere interest in particular characteristics completely supplants emotional response to events involving men with interesting characteristics. Again, you don't need to get too much into like the nitty-gritty of what he's talking about here. Just know that he's highlighting problems within the SDP model in novels. I'm going to skip down to about here on page 21. Oh, sorry. Certainly, one would rather read a modern novel like Ulysses with all its faults on its head. Has anyone ever read The Odyssey or Ulysses? Okay. Oh, yay. Than many of the older dramas and epics involving great characters and great events. But it can hardly be denied that one of Shakespeare's triumphs in his success in doing many things at once, which lesser writers have since done only at one time. He has all the generalized effect of a classical tragedy. We lament for the bad fortune of the great man, who is known good fortune. To this he adds the much more poignant, at least to us, pity one feels in observing the moral destruction of a great man who has once known goodness. And yet, with all this, he combines the pity one feels when one observes a highly characterized individual, whom one knows intimately, as it were, in whom one is interested, going to destruction. One difference between watching Macbeth go to destruction and watching the typical modern hero, whether the drama or the novel, is that Macbeth, there is some going. And then this really isn't important. It's only used for illustration. It says Willie Loman doesn't have very far to fall. He begins the play on the verge of suicide, and at the end of the play, he has committed suicide. Even if we were to assume that the beginning is the time covered in the earliest of flashbacks, we have not far to go from there to Willie's destruction. It is true that our contemporary willingness to exalt the potentialities of an average man makes Willie's fall seem to us a greater one than is really dramatically. But the reliance on convention will, of course, sooner or later dictate a decline in the play's effectiveness. Macbeth continues to be effective, at least in part because everything necessary for a complete response to a complete action is given to us. A highly individualized nobleman is sent to complete moral, intellectual, and physical destruction. So that is what Booth is going to set out to prove. And he does so first by getting us to understand how Shakespeare makes the audience sympathize with Macbeth. Okay? Part 2 is going to go into how Shakespeare uses the events in the plot to further show the destruction, but to also keep us understanding of the reasons why Macbeth chose to do what it is he chose to do. Okay? So part 2 you're going to read for homework and highlight what you find important, okay, what you think supports the overall theme or thesis of this paper. And then tomorrow when we come back together, we'll talk about part 2 and read part 3 to finish it up. Okay? Any questions? Alrighty.